So this lesson is right up my alley. Now, I was reading this. I read it for the first time earlier in the week. And I said, man, I really like this. So I read it a few times and kind of went through it. I'm a big planning guy. I love developing plans. We actually run our heating air conditioning company on a business model. It's called EOS, and it is a detailed planning program. And so that's one of the things that I want to talk about today. Is I want to talk about developing a plan. It starts out underneath the top. It says, where there is no vision, the people are unrestrained, which is actually Proverbs 29, verse 18, not 28. In the book, the typo says Proverbs 28. So Proverbs 29 says, where there's no vision, my people are unrestrained. What does that mean? How can we take that, and what can we apply to our lives or to this organization from those verses? Okay, where there's no vision, there's no direction. Anything else?
A plan, the organization goes in all kinds of, they can go in all kinds of different directions. They don't have a focus on where they're going.
Very true. Margaret? Right. Yeah, I mean, without a specific goal, you say there's less dedication? Yeah, there's less dedication, less direction. Any Alice in Wonderland fans here? So Alice in Wonderland, if you've ever seen the movie, Alice is down this little rabbit hole thing, and she's wandering and runs across a tree. There's a fork in the road that goes right and one that goes left, or right and left, whichever's left. One way, then another way. There's two different directions, and there's a cat sitting up on this tree. And she asks the cat, which way should I go? And the cat's like, well, it depends. Where do you want to end up? And Alice said, well, it really doesn't matter which way I go. Then the cat replied, well, then it really doesn't matter which road you take. Because if you have no destination, there really is no concern about a set path. Because the destination provides the information that you need to work on getting there. And that's kind of where this comes from. Now, there is a challenge that we have in the conservative church, and I want to address this up front. We hear comments that are made from members of churches, well, we don't really want to build a plan because this isn't a business. Because businesses build plans, we're not a business, so we need to be careful on building a plan. That's very true. We're not a for-profit business. Technically, legally, we are a non-for-profit entity, which is registered as a business. But we have to be careful with what we do, because inside of Scripture, we've talked several times this quarter that we do not resemble the first century church. We talk about doing first century things and things in biblical ways, but we don't model the first century church. They didn't have a building and a bell, and they probably had variation in times, and they met in homes and smaller groups. This is convenient. We've adapted to the 21st century. We've evolved into what we've evolved into, and we have to make sure that what we do doesn't violate Scripture. But interestingly enough, God talks about planning a lot throughout the Bible. And so I think as children of God, people that are in an organization such as this, it is wise of us to embrace planning. Now, we don't want to make it overly complex. Last Sunday, I believe it was, we talked about, I don't remember what the title last week was. We'll flip back. Oh, I feel threatened. And we talked about, things being organic. Reprimanding, encouraging, motivating people, how we wanted it to be organic. And we talked at lunch when my kids were over at lunch about, things being organic. And at some point, the hope is that it becomes very organic, very natural, which I think that's the intent of saying organic. We want it to be natural. We want it to just be common behavior of us as a group to reach out to one another, encourage one another, be part of each other's lives, enjoy spending time together. And because our kids come over about every Sunday for lunch, a variety of them. Some of them, will have other plans, but there's very seldom a Sunday that one of the set's not with us. And we talked about this. This is just natural that it happens because they're all fairly local and we like spending time together. But that took years and years and years of being together and planning and orchestrating some planning stuff to get there. So to become natural or organic, sometimes we have to structure things in a way to build the habits. Because really that's what we want it to be. We want this to be a habit for us to behave organically. This all makes sense. Anybody think I'm crazy? Anybody think, well, a few people think I'm crazy, but anybody think I'm off my rocker? And this is way out in left field, and want to debunk this and say, I completely disagree with you, which is 100% fine. We don't always have to agree, but we can have a great conversation on that. Because I really think that we need to look at this and look at this section and have a serious conversation on planning. And I think we can have a great discussion on that. Any thoughts, comments, anything you got out of this? Because I'm going to take us a little bit different direction than he did. I really liked where Steve went with this, but there's some things that I want to talk about outside of what's in the lesson plan this morning. Was there anything in here that jumped out at you? On the right side, halfway down, it says, some will have a difficult time accepting the congregation needs a vision or a plan to do the Lord's work. And that's true. Some of this may be a little bit uncomfortable. Some of this may be what's not the norm. But I really wonder if we make it sincere, objective driven, and we see outcome and fruits from this. We see our ability to reach the community, be more active, have increased faith and increased connectivity as a family, increased influence in the community. I really think that we can benefit from some structure and some planning. One comment that we don't ever want to use is we don't want to justify what we do with the phrase, well, the ends justifies the means. We don't want to, step outside of what we have scriptural authority to do just because we can reach people. Because we do. We see that in the religious world today. I've talked about the Christian church that I grew up in and how it went. When I went there, it had an organ, and they played the organ and sang. Well, now they have a full-fledged rock band. And that was within 20 years that they went from adding they call it contemporary, the contemporary worship, and then they had the traditional for, as they said, the old people that didn't like the contemporary. Then slowly the traditional assembly numbers dwindled. So they said it doesn't make sense to have both. They got rid of the traditional, went all contemporary. And that's not the goal of this group. The goal of this group is to stay a conservative church that follows biblical practices and biblical ways. But I think we can do it with a little bit more structure and organization, for lack of a better term. All right, is there anything about the planning succession that Steve laid out? He laid out a pretty good 5-year plan. I mean, in my world, it was a little slow. I think we should, move a little bit faster than that. I don't think we need a whole year preparing the plan. We should prepare the plan pretty quick and start getting busy. So, and I know that's what the four of us have talked about, is going into next year with a better plan, with a structured plan, and with some theme stuff. All right. You guys were talking a bunch again this morning. Anything in here you want to talk about? If not, we're going to jump out of this and we're going to go to something else. Yes, sir. Chuck, run over to Greg, please.
In terms of speed of execution, you mentioned four of us having conversations, and we are hoping to engage a lot more than just four. The proverb letter also says that with plans that have much consultation or many counselors, those are successful. I think sometimes when we talk about having to tap the brakes, it's about making sure the plan isn't running over anybody. It's not really that we don't have the tools and the desire and the means to move forward, but it's not a train that's designed to run over people. It's a train designed to have enough room for everyone on board. So I think that's the secret. One of the secrets to successful planning is this a plan in order to cut staff, or is this a plan in order to bring everyone into alignment with the same vision for the organization? I have been in organizations where the stated plan was one thing, but the intended results were to, by attrition and frustration, eliminate people that weren't seemed suited to be part of the future of the organization. And that's one thing we also want to avoid strenuously, is a plan that in effect says, we are going to do this, and if you don't like it, you can hit the road. That's not the intention of a well-developed and well-counseled plan.
Yeah, that is very true. And interestingly enough, the church I grew up in, they had that conversation. There are people that will leave if we did away with the traditional service, even though there's only 10 or 15 that show up. If we do away with that, they have said they will leave. And they said, fine. If you want to leave, leave. You're either going to adapt or you can go find somewhere else. And that is a poorly crafted plan. The ultimatum methodology is typically never has a good outcome. And I don't think we find that biblically. Unless it's something that's in error, taking a hard stand on something is a dangerous place to be. And I think that's what we'll find as we discuss further. All right. So I was jumping around the internet yesterday. So I read through this a couple times, and I just Googled, church planning. And I started reading some articles, started reading some blogs, started reading some passages, and I found an article that is 10 planning principles from the book of Proverbs. And so I read through them. I was like, man, these are really, really solid principles. And so what I want to do with the rest of our time today, unless there's something in here that you want to jump into, specifically in the book, is I want to look at these 10 principles and see how we can apply them in our efforts to be committed to spiritual growth, in our efforts to engage, energize, and streamline what we do, in our efforts to grow as a group. Quick update on this book and the rest of the quarter. We're in the anybody, somebody, and nobody phase on teacher for Wednesday night. So anybody can do it. Somebody should do it, and nobody has talked about it yet. So one of you, anybody, somebody's, nobody's. I would love for you to volunteer. I've got a couple that I'm going to ask. If nobody steps up and does it, I won't publicly ask you right now, put you on the spot. Thought I'd done it to Josh Bunch this morning. I want him to freak out a little bit. But we do need somebody for class on Wednesday. And then the plan is we're going to knock these chapters out one meeting time. So we should be done with this book by the end of the year. I've done some looking through it. I don't want to drag this out. I don't want to spend a lot of time laboring on points. They're very succinct points. And I think when we leave one of these chapters, we can agree that it is, man, this is vital to what we do. Or, man, this is probably not something we're going to embrace fully, but how are we going to embrace it? So we're going to hit a chapter every time we meet. So Wednesday will be chapter 7. Next Sunday will be chapter 8, 9, 10. There's 14 chapters. So we've got like 1 or 2 class periods in there for wrap up and summary. Or if we get stuck on a chapter that's in depth, we can stretch that out if we need to. So that's the plan going forward. And then Andrew is set to teach first part of January. All right. So turn over the book of Proverbs, if you will. Because everything we're going to talk about the rest of our class period today is going to be in the book of Proverbs. So I will kind of give you the bullet point, give you the summary, and then we'll read a couple of the Proverbs that go along with this. Some of them are long. I'm not going to have Chuck run the mic to every person. That way we can speed this up a little bit. So I don't want to take a bunch of time just moving a microphone. Those of you joining us online, flip over there and kind of read along with us as we go through. So basically it starts out in this article, it says, is strategic planning biblical? I thought that's a valid question. Is it biblical? Is it wise? Is it helpful? And I think that in Proverbs we find some wisdom that will help us to understand that, yes, planning is biblical. If we look at Scripture, I got to thinking about instances in the Bible that talk about planning. You know, Paul talked a lot in his letters to the different churches. My plan is to come visit you. My plan is to do this. So we do see planning. Jesus sent the disciples out, 2 by 2. I'm sure they left with a plan. I'm sure that he didn't just say, go do whatever. Just the 2 of you go do something. They left with a plan. They left with some instructions, and they left with some goals in mind. So I do think that we find in the New Testament some good examples of planning. And I do think in the book of Proverbs we find some great wisdom. All right, so the first one is planning is thinking deeply about our future work. It is legitimate and wise. Some say, some say that we should just go with the flow and it should be spontaneous and organic. Then someone also said that only dead fish go with the flow. I thought about that, and I was like, kind of odd, but kind of true. If you have a fish, because again, if you have a stream going down, you have a flow of water, if it's a live fish, they're going to move one way or the other. They're not just going to go with the flow, but only the dead fish go with the flow. So we don't want to be that. So we see in this that we should take time, to, again, be careful and strategic. Don't be hasty. Don't be in a hurry. Do not run over people. And that we should take time to plan before we jump into action. Somebody read Proverbs 11, verse 14. Okay, so kind of to Greg's point, there's a wisdom in having many. What about Proverbs 12:5? Okay. 14 verse 8. We see a lot of, solid advice about planning, thinking deeply, not be hasteful, and to do this in a structured way. So point number 2, planning should be done with the help from many advisors or counselors. Our initial ideas can be way off the mark. Sometimes we come up with crazy ideas. Because if we sat in here and we wrote down, everybody wrote down what we want in 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years. Where do we see this church going? There's 40 people here this morning. We're probably going to have 40 different variations of where we want to go. Very few of us are going to be on the same page. And when we get streamlined, again, there may not be a bunch of difference. There may just be small differences in where we go. But in the counsel of many, there's a lot of wisdom. We should carefully assess our material resources before we begin. We need to know our own strengths and our own weaknesses, and the strengths and weaknesses of our leaders, and what is our, what are we really good at, and what do we really struggle with. And that was kind of what the self-assessment at the beginning of this book talked about. All right, so again, it talks about 11:14 once again. What does Proverbs 12, 11, and 15 say? We have to work. What about 15? All right, so we must work, we must be open to input, open to, not being stuck on our ways. So let's jump over to some of these I've not read. Let's jump over to Proverbs 24:3. This one, there's like 30 Proverbs. And if anybody's interested, actually, I'll have Jeff send out a link to this. If anybody wants to be able to go through this and spend some time in this, we'll send it out tomorrow. We'll send out a link to this document.
By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established.
Okay, so there's a lot of wisdom in what we do. And then let's look for one more for that. Let's look at 28:19. Okay. So again, input, wisdom, activity produces outcome, but we need to make sure that it is wise activity. All right, so point number 3 is planning needs to be sequential. We need to figure out what needs done first, second, third, and last. Paul teaches the same truths in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. One servant plants, another waters, another reaps. Paul built churches as an expert builder, starting with a good foundation, which is Jesus' 3-year ministry, followed by logical planning. So we look at Proverbs 24, verse 27. Proverbs 24:27. Okay, so there is a structure to doing this stuff. And then Proverbs 31, verse 10. Okay. That is very true. I'm not sure what that has to do with planning. Okay. You got to go find one. Yeah, I guess that does make sense. Yeah. So you got to go find your good wife before all the other stuff comes into play. All right. So point number 4: self-discipline is essential to reach our goals. An undisciplined worker will dissipate his energy and waste time. Proverbs 12 verse 11 is one of them, and then Proverbs 13:4.
"11 says, He who tills his land will have plenty of bread, but he who pursues vain things lacks sense."
Okay. What about 13? 13:4. Again, activity and self-discipline helps. There's a phrase in training that we use. It's called isobast. It's a big fancy word. It's made up. It's called isobast. Everyone speaks once before anyone speaks twice. So in training, a way to get people involved is you invoke the rule of isobast, which means once you speak once, you sit there and be quiet and let somebody else talk. And then those that are more reserved will eventually jump in and speak. So we're not going to do that today, but just so that may come up in the future. All right, so self-discipline is definitely needed. All right, so point number 5, planning must be followed up with concerted, unfiltered, unified effort. Jim Bond likes to say, which is a consultant, sooner or later, all great strategies and strategic planning stuff degenerates into hard work. Don't chase fantasies, mere talk eventually needs to give way to action. Again, let's go and read Proverbs 12:11 once again. It popped up a lot in these. So let's remind ourselves again, what does Proverbs 12:11 say? You work the field, you get produce. So again, you have to get to work. What about Proverbs 14:23?
"In all labor there is profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty."
So eventually we have to get busy. Talk leads to poverty, labor leads to profit. And then, again, the last one in planning must be followed up with effort is Proverbs 30, verse 27. What was that? Yeah. The locusts have no king, but all of them march in rank. So again, they have an order, they have a work that they do. Again, the Bible talks about the locust being busy, the locust being representing a worker. Same thing with ants. It talks about the work of the ant and what great things they can accomplish. And it's all through structure and the effort. All right, point number 6 in this is delegating tasks to the right people is very important. Be careful who you recruit and hire. So this is one that is very important, because if you delegate to the wrong person, it's not going to be as effective. So let's look at Proverbs 25:19. Some interesting advice. And then 26:10, next chapter over. Like an archer who wounds everyone is like hiring a fool. So again, you have to be careful who we put in charge of certain tasks. And I think a lot of this wisdom, we have to be careful who we choose to partner with as a local evangelist. Because that position is a very, very vital position in what we do. Which is why we've been very, very slow in just going out and finding and hiring. You guys know how much I hate the term hiring a preacher. Going out and hiring somebody, getting a hireling to stand up there and spit out lessons week after week. We want somebody that has the same vision, that's aligned with us, and that's going the same direction that we are. Because we don't want to be like an archer that wounds everyone. Now, as a hunter that has bow hunted for years, I haven't a long time, there is nothing worse. There's no worse feeling than wounding an animal and not being able to find it. You know, that's happened to me a few times. And you look, and you look, and you look. And you go back the next day, and you look, and you look. But as a hunter, you know, eventually you will wound something and not be able to find it. It's just, you know, it's just the odds. So, but we don't want to be someone, we don't be an organization that has someone that goes around just wounding everything. You know, we make fun of those hunters, you know, that just blindly shoot at stuff without being diligent in what they do. So again, the right people is very, very important. All right, point number 7. Skill is needed on the part of those helping to bring our plan to fruition. You know, this means that we must develop our skills as leaders, and we must equip others for skillful ministry. Now let's look at Proverbs 22, verse 29.
Do you see a man skilled in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men.
Man that is skilled in his work will stand before kings. So again, using skilled workers. Psalms 24, verses 3 through 6. Got a long reading this time. 4 verses. Proverbs 24, 3 through 6. So if you look at that, in building house and war, having the right person doing the right stuff is important. When we built this sound booth area back here, I was the rough construction guy. You know, that's my skill set. I love to tear stuff up. I love rough framing. It doesn't have to be square. It doesn't have to be plumb. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it just got to be sturdy. I'm great at building things that won't fall down. You know, I overbuild things to where they're going to stay, and they're going to stay for a long time. So when it came to trimming, doing the trim work, making it look pretty, we had Dale Tolver do that. Again, someone that is good at trim work. Dale has a lot of skill when it comes to making things look good. There's a different skill set in trim work than there is doing rough framing. There's some crown molding that I put up. I'm terrible at crown molding. Terrible. If anybody's ever tried to put up crown molding, you can watch 100 YouTube videos and it still makes no sense. Because you have to have certain angles and some things backwards and some things frontwards, and It takes some skill. So when I go into places that has crown molding, I always look at it and I'm in awe of how tight these joints look. Because again, in skilled labor, there is a lot of success and a lot of things that are just done really, really well. So as we build a plan, we need to make sure, is this the right person for the task? Is this person have is this the part of the body that needs to be doing this? Because if not, there is so much that needs done in the Lord's kingdom that there's work for everyone. There's work for everyone to do. Some things take a skill set that not everybody has. All right. Point number 8. And this one may be a little bit controversial. To succeed abundantly, we must take risks or invest. It says purchase more oxen, even if they make a mess in the barn. Let's look at Proverbs 14:4.
Where no oxen are, the manger is clean, but much increase comes by the strength of the ox.
Yeah. So you may have a clean manger if you don't have any ox, but your increase comes from having ox. Look at Proverbs 27, verses 23 through 27. Okay, so take care of your flocks. Make sure that you're always growing, being prepared, because at some point you're going to need that which you've built up. And then Proverbs 31, verses 10 through 31. You know what? I'll take that one, because I know you guys have been worn out with reading, so I'll take this one. It says, who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her. He will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She also rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservant. She considers a field and buys it. From her profits she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength, and strengthens her arms. She perceives that merchandise is good, and her lamp does not go out by night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She extends her hand to the poor, yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all of her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known at the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies sashes for the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household, and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but yet you excel them all. Charm and deceit and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. So if you look at that, that doesn't sound like someone's just sitting back letting things happen. She buys a land, she tills it, she plants, she waters, she buys tapestry, she makes things, she sells them. She's active. She's investing in her outcome. She's planned. This is planned, invested. And the whole Proverbs chapter 10 speaks well of a woman that is actively pursuing a fulfilled life and glorifying God at the same time. So as we do this, as we invest and take risks, as we get out of our comfort zone, maybe do some things that are unconventional, is it in line with what we see in Proverbs? All right, 2 more quick ones. We should constantly question our motives, desires, and idols. God knows our hearts, and he will bless us according to the purity of our hearts. Look at Proverbs 16, verses 2 and 3. So we always have to ask ourselves, why does this make sense to me? Is it because, is there something in this I want? Is there something in this that is more beneficial for me? Or is this truly for the betterment of the group? We need to make sure we have an unselfish spirit and we don't misguide our steps. All right, the last one says the sovereignty of God will always be a huge factor in the outcome of our plans and efforts. God's purpose will prevail. While we have cause for confidence in God's blessing of our work, there is no place for boasting in our plans or our efforts. Let's look at Proverbs 16:9. All right. And whoever wants to get the last reading in, this is it. Their last chance to participate. Proverbs 27:1. So we don't want to boast in our accomplishments because we don't know what's right around the corner. So as we look at these, we look at these 10, and like I said, I'll have Jeff send this out tomorrow. So that way everybody has them. That way you can look at them, you can study them, you can think about them. But if you come back to this chapter, it's all about developing a plan. And I think we see clearly in the proverb wisdom literature, planning is a good thing. We see in Scripture the examples of planning, the examples of making sure that you are on the right path. All of that goes to being successful in our efforts. And as the 21st century church that's striving to follow a biblical pattern, I think we have some opportunities to do some planning, do some efforts, make some efforts, and do some things that will help us to be better together, be stronger together, be more active, and help reach our community better. So hopefully this has been beneficial. Hopefully you've enjoyed this, and I wish you well on Wednesday, and then I'll be back next Sunday.